there, Kari Schneider. How are you doing today?
Great, thank you.
I'm so glad you're here today from Empower Conditioning Empowered Teen. You're at the table today on the Sports Podcast with Larissa Mills. Kari, you've been coaching athletes from grassroots to Olympians and private clients for over 25 years. You were the head strength coach to the men's and women's Canadian national volleyball teams for 8 years, and the assistant strength coach for women's national hockey for 3 years, leading them to a gold medal.
There's just not the pool of national level athletes that I had in the center of Canada in Winnipeg. So the only national level athletes I would have would be individual athletes or pro hockey players, or I'd have say for the 2012 Olympics, I'd have the rowers that were the younger ones who didn't go to the Olympics. So I'd have the leftover national athletes, or I'd have some pro athletes. And the rest of the athletes that weren't private clients or corporate clients were young club athletes. And what was shocking, so this is around anywhere between 2010 and 2015, is I started to see...
They're great years for me to write to, so it's great to hear it.
Yeah, so 2010, 2015, I started to see athletes who were still in high school showing up at the gym with huge Starbucks cups or coffees to come in and train. And that's when I realized, because this is the distinction here. When I was with the Sport Institute and I was contracted by the Sport Institute, this is the top level of sport in Canada. And when you are at the top level of anything, I don't care if it's the military, sport, whatever, you know your role and you do not deviate from your role, and you use your performance enhancement team, the other people who have their roles. So it wasn't my place at the top level of sport to speak about nutrition or mental health or anything like that. However, as a coach, and I educated myself massively in other areas, by the time I was in London, then I started to realize that, holy cow, these young athletes, they have to know the nutrition. They have to know some of these psychological aspects. They have to know some mental imagery or this or that, because they weren't getting any of it. And when they were coming in, they're having these awful nutrition habits or simply lack of discipline, all kinds of things.
Did you see some lethargy? Did you see kids with not the same energy because they're just not as focused, or I find it lifestyle change. Let's do the Starbucks thing and come in and work out. Let's go to the phone right after. Well, what happened to that mental habit? Like my dad, he would be like, no, you're done rowing. You need to hydrate. You need to stretch. Listen to your coach. Get the feedback. Go over what your body was telling you to do. Did you memorize the neural pathway? Like all of that, I don't see anymore.
So those things, it's interesting you say that, because it was in noticing the lethargy, it was such a thing that on our weekly meetings with my coaches, so I would have other strength coaches who were working with some of the teams, and on our weekly meetings, we would have to adjust how we did things to adapt for that lethargy. Because at first, I'm an expert in periodization. I know exactly how to get what I need and when to put the recovery in and all of that from a body, from a physical aspect. So we started to think, okay, well, the timing of this practice and this thing and the frequency of this. And what we realized is that whether it was hockey or volleyball or track, the weekend events were so long and so packed, and so we were addressing those things. So we might have to put in a recovery session, or we might have to implement some nutrition conversation. However, what really was underlying all of that, because I kept thinking to myself, well, what about when I was that age? What about when my husband was that age? What about they were doing just as much, if not more? If I think about my husband or I think about myself, multiple sports within high school, not one, not two, multiple sports within high school. And so then I'm taking a look at what the frequency would look like, what the seasonal would look like for that high school athlete versus our high school athlete now. And what I started to realize is that, okay, yes, they did need us to make sure we were planning and periodizing the way we were, have the conversations, because we were always connected with the sport coach, not just us. We wanted to make sure that we were in conversation with them. So yes, those things were necessary. However, there was a much bigger underlying beast that we couldn't address, and it was the home life, it was the sleep, it was the what are you eating at home, it was the what are your practices at home, when are you getting to bed, how connected are you with other humans in a way that feels fulfilling. There were so many other things that were simply there that it's even as recently as before the original shutdown, I would have track athletes, and I started to implement every single time I saw them. I started to ask, okay, what's your win today? And these are achievers. When you get an individual sport athlete versus a team sport athlete, the individual sport athletes are typically far more self-driven than the team sport athletes. There's more of an internal drive versus versus an external validation. And I started asking them, what's your win? And some of them would have a hard time coming up with a win. Really? Because they'd set, not that there wasn't one. And then I might have talked to the parent afterwards and they were like, what? We just came off of a huge win or a huge upset against so-and-so. And I said, well, that's not what they said. And it's because in that kid's mind, their bar was a standard that was different than what would ordinarily, or what we think would ordinarily have been the bar for that age back 10 years ago, 20 years ago. The bar of, I got to communicate with friends, or I had a great, and finally we did this enough days in a row that finally people started to say, oh, I got through my math homework so much better. And I was like, yes, you know, your win doesn't have to be that you made it to OFSA. Your win doesn't have to be that you had a new PB. Your win on day to day.
I made sure I had balanced meals. And I'm going to add two other things on here that I'm really finding that the majority of the people I'm interviewing are saying, and I think I'm hearing you say this too, is that we're looking at, as organizations, from the organization standpoint, like yourself, we're doing our jobs, but we need the home life to kind of step up. And I think that there is this underbelly, and it's here. And I think it's about time we change as an organization. I would want my policies changed. And I do that for organizations, for sports organizations, bringing the parents on, having them do courses about how we're going to support our child. We're not going to criticize constantly. There was a dad at a hockey practice the other day yelling at his kid, screaming at his kid beside my little 9-year-old. And my 9-year-old comes home and he goes, Mom, this guy was like telling, you know, his dad was a head and he was telling him to F off. And my kids never heard those words before. And this dad was doing it vocally in the practice. And do you know what I found? It was harassment. It is emotional abuse. And it's as though
that's okay. And it's not okay.
Should not accept it. I think clubs, we should be like an education and a medicine. Let's set our standards. And this is what you're allowed to do and say, parents, because this is not how we believe this is going to work. If you're going to treat your child like this isn't going to help them be a better athlete. And I think that needs to be expressed. As blunt as that sounds, that we need the parents to work with the clubs and organizations.
Oftentimes parents would come in, and just to be transparent, I'm a parent of 5 kids with a blended family with the ages from 20 years old to 9 years old. So my 20-year-old, I parented one way as a single mom for a period of time. And my 9-year-old, I'm parenting differently now because of the differences that I know or see or in different ways. However,
your experiences and how it's changing your parenting. You're evolving,
exactly.
right?
And
So,
but here's something that isn't systemic. It's not something you can build into a club. And that is that if somebody comes into the gym and they have to follow the gym rules, whether it's a gymnasium or my
like a
strength and conditioning gym, and they have to follow those rules, if that parent has to do that because they really want their kid to be on that team, so then they follow all those rules. But their want for the kid to be on that team is the thing that trumps them disagreeing with those rules. But as soon as that kid gets in the car, as soon as that kid gets home, then they're going to do what they think, well, I never had to eat a certain way, or I never had to. And then that home rule goes and becomes the thing. So we've got this scenario where the parenting household can influence the child massively via modeling. And then you've got, as soon as they reach a certain age, that parenting household that was the biggest influence in their life, as soon as they reach that certain age, it's not the parent anymore, it's their friends, it's social media, it's whatever they're seeing on their phone, then that's the biggest influence. So by the time, depending on their cognitive, their emotional development, say they're, depending on a female, male, but say they're anywhere between 12 and 17 years old, somewhere in that gap, that's when they go from being most influenced from their parents, which who knows whether their parents was a great influence or not. I had parents who were not the greatest of influences. And then they go to something else. It's going to be their friends. It's going to be their who they follow on social media. It's going to be whatever they're susceptible to, whatever need they have, they're going to look for it somewhere else. And it's going to either be in a friend.
Now there's more ways to look for it.
Exactly.
Right? We only had one way, friends or parent. Now, I think it was very interesting fact that we discovered the other day that children are actually looking for their peer confirmation and affirmation and don't care what parents say to them anymore. They don't care about their opinions. They don't care about the way they talk because no one is talking. So that established relationship of bonding and security of attachment, which has to be made by 8. And if it's not made by 8, psychologically, that development does not happen as it should later on. It leads to other behavioral problems and lack of, security, blah, blah, blah. But I just found, and I've had to gravitate and change as a parent because each of my 3 children are very different. I've had to learn how to parent slightly each one a little differently. And when you have 90 students in a class, I'm parenting 90 different fruits and apples. But I always tell them my door is open and that I can connect. And if you want to eat your lunch in here, guess what? I get 20 kids in my lunch because they won't talk to their parents, but they're going to come and talk to me. So something is missing. And like I told you about the film, Connect the Dots, Naomi Weiss is directing that. Beautifully done. It says it right there. They can't connect with their parents. So they're feeling alone and depressed, and then they gravitate to social media. They gravitate to feeling lonely in their rooms on social media and on their phones. So go ahead.
Well, to your point, my stepson's mom is a vice principal, and she has that exact open door policy, and that's exactly what happens. There are kids who are, issues from anything from, I can't even tell you, but the issues are major. And so you have this scenario where if I think of myself personally, and I had 2 parents who were very disconnected with me. So where I found my connection and my landing pad were in my friends. And I slept over at my friends' houses. I was so close with my friends' parents, all of these things, because I didn't have it at home. Now, that was in a scenario before social media, before cell phones, before anything like that. Now, at least I had a human connection, people who were like family to me because I had this group of friends that I
And
could
they
bounce from
provided you with
place.
that security and that support and that person who you could always relationally find and feel valued, because we always
Right.
feel
And
valued.
so by the time I had my daughter was born in 2000. So she's a 2000 baby. And at that time, that's when what was coming out at the time was, what are they called? Einstein videos, baby Einstein, all of that was coming out at the time. And so I was like, oh, this is great. Well, around a few years later, right when that was coming out, a few years later, I was also heavily in labs and doing research on, child development, physical activity, all of the exercise physiology, all of the things like that. And what I learned at that time, and this is after my oldest was about 5 years old, was that children should have zero screen time until after they're 5 years old.
Yeah,
Now,
6 and
I didn't
continuing.
know that.
Yeah, 6.
Right. And that's zero. And so this is, I'm talking 15 years ago, I learned about this and knew this, but the public, it's a good 10 to 15 year delay for the public to find out the actual data and research and what's actually known.
Yeah.
So I knew it early. And so by the time it came to my stepsons, my youngest daughter, there in our household, we don't watch TV with the kids, or the kids don't have any TV throughout the weekdays, period. On a weekday, on a school night, there's no TV. And so screen time was simply a thing. And if they wanted to play video games, like the oldest four are between 20 and 17 years old now. Yeah. But 10 years ago, there's a whole bunch of little ones and a baby. And now, though, you're looking at a scenario where parents used to think that, okay, if I do baby Einstein, or if I give them this, oh, look how cute it is that my kid can play on the iPad. They know how to do the iPad right away. This is so awesome. And I'm just like, no. But, and how great is it?
By age 4, they can't cooperate, communicate, control, or compromise by age 4. Their language.
Exactly.
Dr. John Hutton MRIs children's brains, and he's saying because they're watching an iPad and they know how to use it, they're not talking, so they're not developing their language. And he says we're actually delaying children.
Yeah. And it's that interaction, it's that feedback that's necessary for all of the neurological development that they need in their prefrontal cortex. And here's the thing. Their prefrontal cortex, your super badass genius part of your brain, doesn't stop developing until they're 25. Well, guess what? By the time my kids are 18 years old, so 2 of them are 19 and 20, 2 of them are 17. So by the time they're 18 years old, can I tell them to not do their screen or anything like that at that age anymore when they're on their own? Well, no. It's their phone. They pay for it now. They have a job now. And then those older 4, now I'm asking them, okay, you know what? You're not going to be on the phone on these hours of the day because you're influencing the young one who's 9.
Yeah.
So she's seeing that all the time and she's not allowed to have a phone. So, these are some of the rules that come in simply because I am guarding the development of their prefrontal cortex. And guess what? That doesn't stop developing until they're 25 freaking years old. So if that's the case and we have so little control, then there's two methods that are the most, I think, poignant for children and the parents. And that's that the parents understand what's going on.
And they don't.
And that the children, they don't. And the children understand what's going on, but it's a massive, quick dopamine hit every single time. It's like
Dr.
eating sugar.
Insignia is a neurologist and he actually studies addiction. And he actually was triggering and sort of he did a experiment that sort of like a mock-up he showed you on a diagram. And this is what happens every time your brain is stimulated. It could be poker, it could be alcohol, it could be drugs, it could be your phone. you are giving, the phone is one of the worst, because actually when your brain hears the notification,
Ding.
your heart rate stimulates your nervous system and pings in your brain, and it stings that little dopamine and cortisol effect to the point where your heart rate is going up to 140, 150 in some of these kids. And he was saying that we're giving kids something more potent than sugar, which is cocaine. He goes, and we're giving them a phone and letting them have it. He thinks the pendulums have swung the other way, because now we're seeing such underdeveloped kids and the mental health, but parents are just like, yeah, well, I like this babysitter. It gives me my free time. I had parents fighting in an arena over phone time while their one kid was on the ice playing against my kid.
Yeah.
Who was going to watch the other kid so they could get their screen time, and fighting over who the other parent was going to be to put that child to bed later that night. I was disgusted.
Yep.
That's why I started.
I
can't believe that.
That's powerful. That's powerful. But that's the thing, because what you're speaking to is an addiction from the parents. It's an addiction from the children. And the addiction comes when there's a gap. The gap is there in that we don't have our ultimate needs met, and that's human connection. Mm-hmm. And our ultimate needs are so, like, you're speaking to the neurological side of the dopamine hit. Well, the physiological side that comes after that ends up being the side of, okay, well, there's going to be a hormonal response besides just the dopamine. Too much of the dopamine is going to go on to the cortisol effect. You've got so much of the cortisol, then your stress hormone of cortisol is up for too long. And then what happens from there is that then I start to see all of the stress responses, the poor sleep, the poor,
and that's really
the poor recovery,
it's really,
or in older.
So anyway, we got sidetracked. we can't
talk we can't follow all the key questions. There's too many great things to talk about.
I know we did talk about 3 or 4 questions all in one, but I didn't need to ask. But one question I'm going to ask now. We know that mental health skills are important and vital for learning coping mechanisms and how to adapt and learn that part of resilience. Are you seeing less and less resilient kids when they have a challenge, they can't meet it, or they just give up faster?
Yeah, there's such a fast feedback loop when it comes to media that a young, especially kids who have had their needs, or their demands met very quickly, very frequently, then there's a really fast feedback loop. If I complain enough, if I look on the phone, or if I whatever, I get my demand met really quickly. And then they never learn the skill, and this is a major skill, of persistence, of trial and error, of exploration, all of those things that having to try again, having to get back up again, having to try something different, having to explore, there's a point where with my kids, there's a few things I've done. Number one, in the gym with entire teams, I've said, okay, you know what? I've been so shocked by the amount of whining or complaining or saying I can't, because they expect it to happen just like that. I've been so shocked by that I've made a blanket rule. Guess what? When you step through these doors, there's no complaining.
Such thing is complaint. Yeah.
There's no complaining. If there is an issue, please come and talk to me about it, and please bring what you think is your solution.
And we've always,
but there's no complaining.
Perfection, right? Everyone wants perfection. But what I like when some coaches say this is practice makes progress.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at stages of an athlete's progress to get to a level in which there is no perfection in sports. There actually isn't.
No.
And that's hard for, I heard Marnie McBean say that once. There is no perfection. There is the goal at achieving certain skills, but there is no perfection. So when you come here, you're looking at making progress.
Yes. Yes. And we like to say, we've put it on the whiteboard several times, which is progress. Progress is perfection. Progress is perfection. But
Thank you.
the
I
thing
love
that
that. That's great. I love
progress
that.
is perfection.
Yeah.
And so the thing you're pointing to, though, when people get caught up in perfection, there's an underlying pattern that's happening. And what it is that when we as humans don't know how to handle the emotion of discomfort or handle something that is a little bit
Go to this.
negative.
Instead of coping and dealing, they just gravitate
Right.
in direction.
But if we can't handle the discomfort of what it takes to go somewhere new, or what it takes to learn, or what it takes to progress, or what it takes to get to that next level, if we can't handle that discomfort, trying to keep things perfect holds us in a stuck or a holding pattern. And what it does, if a young person hasn't studied their own brain enough to understand that the action of, or the inaction of trying to hold in perfection actually is protecting them from being uncomfortable. Yeah. It's protecting them from going through the persistence, the trial and error, the things like that.
Now,
and
I know you just hit on something too. Another podcast that you and I have to do was, we are not, as parents and as organizations, I think more coaches are, allowing our children to fail and knowing what that feels like. So I have to actually cut this short.
Yeah.
Which I'm going to beg you to come back. And I think we have lots of possible projects to postulate on and create from this. But I do want to touch on a few things. I call it discovery. So you and I have talked, and we've discovered about 5 things that I'm going to suggest to our listeners that we need to work on internationally at the, I want to say, grassroots level of sports to the Olympic pro. I'm even seeing pros with these issues now. Gaming addiction. They can't get off the court without checking their, I mean, it's unbelievable. So now I just want to leave. So I'll tell you the 5 and you tell me if you agree with me at the end. So this is what I'm hearing from you. So I'm hearing that we need to definitely have more connection between the sport organization and the parents, and have that synced to be a more helpful, supportive cycle that cultivates happy, healthy, competitive atmosphere, with allowing the children to fail and allowing the children to progress but not be perfect. That would be my perfect organization, right? But without the ability to have emotions and teach our children emotions, they will not do well in any other setting. So we need to focus on,
not only that, they won't,
right? And how to,
yes. Yeah. So I completely agree with that. I'm going to reiterate that in that,
right there,
in this way, any human, young or old, if they can handle negative emotion, if they learn how to process negative emotion, they can handle anything in life. And one of the main reasons we see people with attention issues, with challenges, with anything that's unfortunate or negative or not being able to persevere, it's because they've never learned how to feel or process or deal with something that is uncomfortable.
So also to add to that, I think that we need to look at, maybe perhaps we're looking at, and I've been helping organizations look at how to get more parents involved on a supportive basis and not be so destructive or critical, and get them more in that supportive, educated role. That may help. But really, I think it's about, it sounds like almost providing parents from a younger point, when they have younger kids, educating them about what children need. And I've written several courses to teach routines, sleep. I research phone addiction, gaming addiction, but now I'm finding that those forms of technology and lack of parenting are resulting in a lack of resilience in our children. A lack of ability to be emotional or address our emotions and work for it. And that's sort of what I guess I could summarize from today. If a parent doesn't understand
what the drawbacks and what the danger is of technology with their young ones, if they simply don't understand that, then they're never going to say no, because it is something that their child likes, that distracts their child, that this or that. There's lots of reasons that we want to have a phone for a kid. There's lots of reasons that it's attractive, appealing. However, it's not
Practical,
if
really.
they understand the dangers, they understand what's actually going on, then they're less likely to keep handing the phone over. And when I say they, you know, we've been so tempted by it. I mean, I don't have a rule book in parenting. I created it myself because I didn't have the models that way, but no parent has had the modeling. No parent has had that because we didn't have cell phones then. This is a million
technology.
fold.
We had Atari, gaming, Nintendo. It's been from the 80s, 90s. We've been seeing an increase in technology with a decrease in mental skills and the ability to cope.
Yeah.
So it's directly linked. We know that now because 300% increase in anxiety, depression, and suicide between ages of 12 and 17 in Canada. That's startling. That's an epidemic. And and now these are not even COVID numbers.
But I was just going to say, now we're going to see it. We're going to see it so much more because they haven't been able to socially get together. And so it's now we for those of us who would say, okay, now just have less screen time, period, whether it's computer, TV, phone, you name it. Well, now we can't say that because we want them to have that social connection with their friend. And if they don't, they're completely isolated. And so we've got this conundrum of going, okay, which is the lesser evil at this point?
But also just about balance. 1 hour, not 4.
Exactly.
Right? Like it's about balance.
And honestly, those are some of, if someone had I mean, I can't say that my recipe was perfect, but here's what our recipe was. It was that period, if there was no TV on a school night, if it was on a weekend, they could watch maybe a movie or they could watch a show in the morning on the weekend. And that's what we limited to. If they wanted to play video games, they could play for 20 minutes at a time. If a bunch of them were playing together, they could double up on their time to play 40 minutes together.
Yeah.
But there were time limits and they had to ask permission. There was always permission. There was always a timer.
And that's fantastic.
And then beyond that, none of our kids have had a phone before they were 13 years old.
Yeah.
And once they were 13 years old, and if they had a phone, then there were parameters around that until they're older. And we don't have phones at the dinner table. We sit down for dinner together.
There's nothing in our house. Well, I think you know that we have quite a substantial length of rules, like nothing in the rooms, only alarm clocks, nothing on the second floor. Of course, they need to ask for permission when they're doing homework or anything. There has to be in another room or on the counter. We have a docking station. And I've learned too. I've learned how to balance this. And I have to say, this is still progress for me.
Yeah.
I'm still learning how to do this. But I think that maybe that's a whole other topic.
People are going to think you're crazy.
They do.
People are going to think you're crazy. It's my job to stay cutting edge for my clients, because my clients who are corporate, they want to know exactly what is what. And one of the things that I tell them, just because of, and this is a physiological thing, basically our EMF, it's our electromagnetic frequency waves that we're exposed to.
Yeah.
I have people put timers, my clients, and we do this ourselves, we put timers on our Wi-Fi, so that when we're in bed and we're not using Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi router is turned off.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, one of those old Christmas light timers or timers. We have one of those on our Wi-Fi router, so that when 10 o'clock comes, the actual router putting out the Wi-Fi signal and the waves to look for, or for our phone to look for the Wi-Fi signal, is off, or our phones are on airplane mode.
Girl.
But this is what I have to know this, because I'm looking for optimal health.
Yeah. Yeah.
Optimal health, optimal performance, and that's what my clients want to know from me. So I have to figure that out. And what it is, it's so far, we're so far ahead of what the general population knows that it just is going to take, it's probably going to take another 5-15 years for everyone to go, oh yeah, you know, your cell phone is like smoking. You're only going to have it this much. And these are going to be the protections. But we're also dependent on it from a work standpoint, from a
But you
social
can't limit
standpoint.
it, because I do tell my parents that come for the consulting and the coaching, that when you're working, work from a laptop. No, don't work from your phone. And when you're with your kids, your phone is not with you.
Mm-hmm.
And though, because now I think she was a social worker from CAS I interviewed, and she was saying that now children just want their parents to get off their phone and play with them. They have no one to play with. And
Mm-hmm.
so we've lost a bit of that maternal, paternal raising our children, and now let's just let them sit on that. But really, it's just causing so much in terms of physical and mental delay. So Kari, from Kari Schneider, I want to say thank you from your Empower Conditioning team, and I do hope that you will come back.
That would be fantastic. I know we kind of went down a few rabbit holes, but thank you for enlightening people in terms of what's possible and what's going on.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Excellent. Thank you.